One of the problems with the woke left is that they simply despise debate. They consider it to be a kind of toleration of fascism. Hey there, friends, fans, and foes of Dad Saves America. John Popola here, and I thought I would take this Friday, this Good Friday, to talk about experts, and specifically the debate over what is and is not an expert and what the heck is going on to the places that used to produce them. Places like Harvard University, which the Trump administration is really going at hard. But before I get to Harvard, I want to get in by way of a clip from the Joe Rogan Experience that is frankly one of the most interesting conversations that maybe has ever been on the show. It was a debate between Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. And the question of what is an expert and who are they and what should we do about them was at the center of it. So let's take a look at maybe one of the most heated parts of it, the part that's been going viral everywhere.
I'm still slightly bemused about this move from I'm an expert on this and I have views to I'm a comedian.
I've never claimed to be an expert on anything.
This is the problem, Joe. If somebody
Wait a minute,
says
you have to claim to be an expert on something to have an opinion on something?
you don't have to be.
And if this rule was applied to me, oh my gosh, I don't know. I'm an expert in raising a kid that's not a psychopath and building some businesses. But if credentials is all you need to listen, well, you should probably turn off this video right now.
I'm not a historian, but I'm pumping out history.
But wait a minute,
I'm
what
not
about
an expert,
just-
but I'm talking all the time about
But
this
you're not
thing.
even talking about specifically on what he just said. What's the solution? To not talk about it?
No, it's to have more experts around.
The expert
To
class
hear-
hasn't done a great job,
I know,
man. This is follow the science.
absolutely,
Yeah, but you know what?
absolutely, I
Okay,
agree
so fine.
with
So
that.
during,
I just said to you, I agree with that.
Right, I know.
But
So
one of the
Douglas,
problems
during
is-
all of
Fire
COVID,
away.
I will put my track record against any of the expert class on COVID. So should I have just shut up? Should I have shut up by opposing lockdowns and opposing
No.
vaccine mandates
No.
and
Well,
talking
that
about
was
the
the
lab leak
argument at the
theory?
time. You realize
that's
that,
the
right?
entire argument that you're making. Let the experts handle this.
No.
You're not an expert.
You're
You're right. I was just a comedian.
You're wildly not listening to what I'm saying.
You're saying I claim to be an expert, but then I have like a parachute to get out of it by being like, hey, I'm just a comedian. But I don't think I've ever like really claimed to be an expert.
But
I
why
have
are you
opinions
going around?
on things.
I know, but isn't it weird to be simultaneously saying I'm not an expert on a conflict and talking about it everywhere?
I don't see how you
Do
can't
you
have an
talk
opinion on
about these things?
Some of them, yeah.
Are you an expert?
I am on some, yes.
On some,
But
but
you talk
not.
about some that
But
you're not
some
an
are
expert
not.
on.
You'll
What
know-
should you do if those subjects get breached?
Well, I think that you educate yourself as much as you
Shouldn't
can.
you say I'm not an expert and then give your opinion if you're
depends.
in the middle of a conversation?
I think it's a weird move to say I'm not an expert on this, but I'm going to talk about it nonstop. I think that is strange.
Listen, I will certainly concede that I am weird, but I just fundamentally disagree with this idea that there's an expert class. They can have opinions on all of these things. It's weird for any regular person
No.
who's just read about it.
Not
to,
my view.
This has been maybe one of the most polarizing exchanges on Joe Rogan. If you go into the Twitterverse, you'll find basically people that are either in the Dave Smith camp, which is the expert class has totally failed, and this is all an appeal to an authority, and a diversion from having the real debate, which in this case was mostly about our foreign policy, specifically around Ukraine and Israel. And those who are more hawkish and more pro Douglas Murray, who are like, no, Douglas is right, and he mopped the floor with comedian David Smith. So as some of you might notice, I will sometimes take the middle way. And in this case, I am somewhere in the middle, which makes me especially weird. So what are they talking about here? At the heart of this is a question of whether or not we are in a better world now that all of our elite institutions have revealed themselves to be total frauds and scams, which both sides actually agreed with over the course of this like 2.5, 3 hour conversation. And this is a point where I also agree. A guest of the show, Martin Gurry, has a book called The Revolt of the Public, and he talks about one of the reasons why this has happened, which is basically the internet has made it so that we can see the emperor has no clothes. We can see in real time all the calamitous disasters that people who used to be the experts could gaslight us about. And now they struggle with it because we can just look with our eyes. And they ask us to not see what our eyes see, whether it's Joe Biden's cognitive decline from the start of his presidency straight through to its end, or all the other horrendous things, being told by the experts that we need to be locked down in our homes. But if you protest for racial justice because a relatively rare but tragic accident / manslaughter maybe thing happens, then it's okay and the virus goes away. The virus only cares about you if you're a white supremacist. This is all the stuff that has led a lot of us, myself included, to say this to the expert class. Of course, saying the expert class itself gets into some weird territory. Well, what does this mean? Who are the expert class? And I think this is where Douglas is trying to make a case for the need for experts for real, for a need for expertise. And it's a little flat-footed here. The first 40 minutes of this conversation on the Rogan show basically goes like this. It's 40 minutes of like talking past each other and using this opportunity to essentially scold Joe Rogan for not having enough, I guess you could say, pro-interventionism guests on his show. Okay. But once you get into the meat of it, I think Douglas has a point. And that point is, we do live in a world where it is hard to know what is true. It's harder than ever. And we don't have the sources of expertise that we used to trust. And that does make things harder for all of us. What is going on beyond our own lives? Who should I turn to trust for information that doesn't have some angle they're pushing or doesn't have, isn't just lying to us and basically drawing on references and facts that I can't double check because I don't have the time and are actually just made up. I think that that's a really legitimate concern. And I think that concern, against the backdrop of an already massive tsunami of AI-generated text and images that sound and look very human, that is real stuff. That concern shouldn't be hand-waved away, period. And in a certain sense, this is what our universities were supposed to be helping us do. On the other hand, to Dave Smith's point, all of these so-called experts are a disaster. And they have failed. They have failed in the places where we would think true expertise, like infectious disease and basic scientific research, should have been less political than it turns out to be. And now that it's been revealed to all of us that are paying attention, that the news media, the institutions of science on the national and international stage, and our universities, including Harvard, our oldest and most prestigious, have been gaslighting us along multiple dimensions for years and years, well, maybe we are better off simply not knowing who to trust than trusting liars. And that's the point I think fundamentally Dave Smith is making. He's saying, look, you're talking past me because I don't claim to be a historian and an expert. I just have opinions and you can take them or leave them. But if you think we're going to get to some future magical world where we can trust these institutions, well, good luck with that. There's no evidence for that. And fair enough. I think that is true. Where does that leave us? And how do we even move forward as a society, let alone as individuals trying to navigate the world and understand what's going on? Well, this is where the battle with Harvard comes into play, because this is our oldest university. And it has been the hallmark, the stamp that you are something special.
We're gentlemen of Harvard.
Harvard? You're just wasting the taxpayers' money.
Call your lawyer if you want it.
These are my lawyers. All Harvard men.
All Harvard men. That used to mean something. And in some cases, it still does. But it doesn't mean as much as it used to. And for all of the reasons that Dave Smith was talking about. As a result of what we have been exposed to, Harvard is now under direct attack by the Trump administration.
Funding blocked. Tonight, the federal government follows through on its threat to withhold money from Harvard after the university rejected a list of demands that would impact everything from hiring to viewpoints on campus. Unlike Columbia University, Harvard will not make changes that the Trump administration says combat anti-Semitism. In a bold critique of the government's demands, Harvard's president says, quote, "The university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights."
So it is amazing how closely tied these two things are, because at the heart of that conversation between Dave Smith and Douglas Murray was the question of Israel versus Palestine and America's role as an ally of Israel. And to be perfectly honest, my own views on this are not well educated enough to be worth that much. But one thing I do know is that anti-Semitism isn't the only problem at Harvard. And it doesn't really do the administration any favors to essentially cherry pick Harvard's vice in this way. It doesn't do anything for Jewish Americans. It doesn't do anything for the relationship with Israel, let's say, or the critics who think that we have an excessively Israel-focused administration and foreign policy. Harvard has numerous failures to be worried about. In fact, I would argue that the fact that the students were allowed to be anti-Semitic isn't the problem. The problem is that nothing else was allowed. Students couldn't voice questions about what is a woman or what are the statistical realities as it pertains to race and crime. In fact, Claudine Gay, who is the now discredited but still paid close to $1 million a year former president, who is also a plagiarist, before becoming president, went on the warpath to try to destroy an actual expert academic, Roland Fryer, for doing studies into the relationships between crime, police brutality, and race in America. And because his findings, frankly, showed that the police are mostly not doing the thing that we're all being told they do, which is explicitly targeting Black Americans for death, Claudine tried to destroy him, tried to run him out of town, closed down his research center, and all but succeeded in ruining his academic career. That's the problem with Harvard. The problem with Harvard isn't actually anti-Semitism. It is the complete, what muckety mucks like to say, epistemic closure of the institution. The fact is, these places are no longer a source of truth discovery. Douglas is bemoaning the fact that it's harder to know what's true and who to trust, and he's right. But what I don't think he's taking seriously enough is that, well, frankly, that Joe Rogan conversation is more of a search for truth than a lot of the conversations you can have on a campus like Harvard. There's a saying among free speech advocacy: all speech should be allowed with the tiny provisos about imminent threats and things like that. But that is really like very narrowly defined. That the answer to hate speech is more speech. Wrong think is different think. That the way you get to the truth or get closer to it is in a battle of ideas. So if you got a bunch of pro-Palestinian / some pro-Hamas people rallying on your campus, so long as they're actually being peaceful and not destroying property, hold a counter-protest, have actual debates. One of the problems with the woke left is that they simply despise debate. They consider it to be a kind of toleration of fascism. And this has made them intellectually lazy and lost. And so what was happening on the Joe Rogan podcast is the path forward. Having discourse, having two people with very different points of view actually sit in a room together and hash it out. That is how it works. That is the only path I know to trying to understand what is and isn't true. And it's never going to be perfect. But the reason why I got into doing this kind of thing, making YouTube videos, launching this channel, is because back when I was a creative director at Spike TV, I engaged this battle of ideas with a rap video pitting John Maynard Keynes against Friedrich Hayek. And I'm a Hayek guy. I think Keynes is full of shit. But I actually decided, let's have the strongest versions of those arguments duke it out. And it was a rap video. This week, and tragically through Easter weekend, I will be sitting in this chair, sitting at my computer, which is a massive set of screens just off screen to my right, working on the next one, which in theory will launch next Tuesday on Earth Day. This is a battle between Al Gore, Alex Epstein, and Bjorn Lomborg on whether or not we have a climate crisis or whether the climate is something we can master through technology and progress. And I think that's the answer. I think the way we make sense of the world is by having a battle of ideas, by having discourse, radical discourse. That's the name of the channel where the video will launch, and we'll put links to it when it goes live, which, again, God willing, will be on Tuesday. I might be dead, but hopefully the video will be live. And I think that is what we need to do as parents with our kids age appropriately, right? Like, I don't think you should debate about gender ideology with your 5-year-old. I think that's satanic. But I think that as they mature, one role we can play as parents is engage in the Socratic dialogue, steel man the other point of view, ask questions, ask for them to defend their position, because especially as they become teenagers, they think they're experts in everything. And a little bit of questioning goes a long way to expose, where your assumptions are and where your mistakes are. And I think that's something I've tried to do with my son. I think it's something that we should all do. And I think we should do it with ourselves and with each other. Like, don't dig in your heels. Question your assumptions. Think about whether what you believe to be true actually is. And as we head into Easter weekend, you've seen this week we launched some stuff around Christianity. We're not a exclusively Christian channel, but I am Catholic, and I thought that would be fun to share. That's something we're invited to do as Christians too. The church actually has a long history of establishing centers for higher learning. The first university in the world was in Bologna, Italy, founded by the Catholic Church. Most of the universities that constitute the sort of foundational institutions of the Enlightenment were actually started by the Catholic Church. And that is because, as I understand it, the pursuit of understanding of our natural world isn't an assault on faith. It's a use of our free will. It is a celebration of God's creation. And I think that's an incredibly healthy way to approach life and approach the world and approach faith. It is not about dogma. It is about using the free will that I believe God gave us to understand what it means to be a human being and what these incredible mysteries that we encounter mean for us. And if you are Christian, there is no greater mystery than the notion that Jesus actually died and resurrected and left behind some interesting evidence like the Shroud of Turin, which if you haven't heard about that, man, make that your Google search. Make that the video you watch on Sunday instead of this one. So I hope you have a happy Easter. If you are Jewish, I hope you have a joyful Passover. And if you're like, I don't care about this religious gobbledygook, fine, I just hope you have a great weekend.